will kill you if you touch him.
Do not come between the Nazgul and his prey.
I am no man.
In a world overflowing with movies, we need a hero. Someone to separate the bad from the good.
Sounds like a job. Verbal dioramas. Watches all the movies from comedy to drama. From the top roll sound. And don't forget the action. She'll watch until the end and then she'll give you her reaction. Movies you know, movies you don't. Prequels, sequels, remakes, and trivia and outtakes. Movies you know, movies you don't. Interesting stories, all the categories.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma and welcome to Verbal Diorama episode 300, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This is the podcast that's all about the history and legacy of movies you know and movies you don't. I'm glad to be with you, dear listener, here at the end of All Things. All Things being 300 episodes of a film history podcast that literally just started as a means to bring me some joy at a very dark time in my life. And it's also not the end, not of this podcast, nor this series of episodes, but it is the final episode of Peter Jackson's outstanding entries into the Lord of the Rings cinematic universe, which wasn't a thing, but it is now. And that, my friends, is worth celebrating on a podcast that is purely here to celebrate the wonders of the history of film. Welcome to Verbal Diorama. Whether you are a regular returning listener, whether you are a brand new listener to this podcast, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to listen to this podcast. I am so overwhelmed, in all honesty, to have you here for the history and legacy of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And just really a huge thank you to everyone who has listened to this podcast, continues to listen to this podcast, maybe even will listen to this podcast in the future as well. This podcast has been going now for 6 years. And now I can say 300 episodes of Verbal Diorama exist in the world. And really, yes, that's down to me. To be honest, that is down to me doing them. But it's also down to you guys, to the people who listen to this podcast, because I would not just be talking into the ether for 300 episodes. I have amazing listeners. I have incredible people who contact me on email and social media. I know there are people out there who genuinely do listen to this podcast because they tell me that they do. And I do this for me, but I also do it for you as well. And I've done it 300 times. It's crazy. But this podcast means so much to me. These movies mean so much to me. And having 300 episodes means so much. I'm not going to get teary, I promise. I am starting to get a little bit emotional, but I'm not going to go all teary on you. I am going to crack on because I've got so much to talk about in this episode. Here we are. It is the 300th episode. It's the fourth of a 5-part episode on the history and legacy of The Lord of the Rings, focusing on Peter Jackson's trilogy. but also sandwiched between the two animated versions. They are the only two animated versions that exist, but they are the only two that I'm featuring in this series. Ralph Bakshi's The Lord of the Rings from 1978 and last year's The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. That this movie is the 300th episode isn't an accident. As I mentioned, these movies mean so much to me personally. I have been to New Zealand. I have visited some of the locations for filming. As I mentioned in the Fellowship episode, I've been to Hobbiton. I've even been at one of the mountains of Mordor. But my love for these movies has been nothing compared to the love I have for this podcast, for telling these histories and legacies of movies every week. And in many ways, this has been my quest, my journey, something that I had to do. Almost like a rite of passage for me as a podcaster to push myself to do the biggest possible thing I could think of. Because even the smallest podcast can change the course of the future. But also selfishly, I'm also hoping that these episodes maybe will encourage people who haven't listened before to listen now. That maybe if I push myself to work harder on these than I ever have on anything else, that I could get a few more listeners, become a Gimli-sized podcast rather than a Frodo-sized podcast. I guess all I can ask of you as you're listening right now is that if you have enjoyed this series, if you enjoy this podcast, if you've enjoyed previous episodes, please, please, please spread the word. Verbal Diorama has lit the beacons. Verbal Diorama calls for aid. Will you be my Rohan? Will you answer? Spread the good word about Verbal Diorama, about what I do. I would be so grateful, and it would mean the world to me to have more people listening to this podcast for the 300th episode. That would just be so awesome. I promise I am going to crack on now. But if you are new to this series, if this is the first episode out of all of the Lord of the Rings episodes that I've done so far, let me go through the episodes and whether you should listen to them or not if you're really that interested. So the first episode on the Ralph Bakshi 1978 Lord of the Rings, you don't technically need to listen to that, but I would recommend it because it sets up the story really well, including Saul Zaentz and his link to the rights and the estate. What I will say is if this, The Return of the King, is your first entry into the Peter Jackson trilogy of podcast episodes, please go back and listen to The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, because you really do need to have listened to those. Because obviously that gives introduction to Peter Jackson's part of the story, but also the way these episodes are structured, because the movies were all filmed together. The episodes are not really set up as standard Verbal Diorama episodes. It is one huge self-contained story. This is technically the third of 3 interconnected stories in 5 episodes, where this is technically the 4th of a 5-part complete story. I promise that does make sense. But in The Fellowship, it talks about Peter Jackson's vision for the series, his dealings with Miramax, the move to New Line, and the various changes he made to the source material, as well as specifics on The Fellowship of the Ring, including casting choices and costume design. The last episode focused on The Two Towers, specifically the Battle of Helm's Deep, the introduction of and technology surrounding Gollum, as well as the production and art design choices for the series. And this episode goes into everything else. So it's a lot. The rest of the visual effects by Weta Workshop, the makeup and prosthetics, the music across all of the movies by Howard Shore, how it became one of the biggest Academy Award-winning films of all time. And I was going to talk about the everlasting legacy of these movies. However, being honest, I feel like this episode will be pretty huge. So I am going to move the legacy part to the next episode, which is going to mostly be around the recent anime, The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, and the effect The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit have had on New Zealand's tourism and film industries, the retaining of the rights, and the future of the franchise as well. I also want to add a couple of caveats for the huge Tolkien and Lord of the Rings fans who may be listening to these. Yes, I probably have butchered some pronunciations over the series, and I apologise for that. And no, I haven't included every fact, every tidbit, every piece of information that's out there on the internet, because there is a lot. The Lord of the Rings is immense. There is so much information just on Tolkien's novels that don't even relate to the movies. And then there's so much information on these movies. It's overwhelming, in all honesty. Anything I mention, there is a wealth more information out there to elaborate further. And if you are interested in anything that I mention and you think, oh, I'd really love to know more about the production design on The Lord of the Rings, as an example, please do, because it's incredible production design. But there is so much information on the internet. So if you are interested, please have a look into it further. This series of episodes has been an incredible task. This episode in particular has been a lot more difficult than most episodes, which was actually unintentional because I didn't realise the huge task that I'd left for myself until I came to doing this episode after doing the other two. And by that point, you can't go back and change the other two. But like Peter Jackson, he made the final part the biggest one, so technically I'm just following his lead. Let's jump into it. Sauron's armies grow stronger, and this episode is in fear of failing. But don't worry, the King of the Dead owes me a favour and will probably turn up to give me a hand at editing. No man can kill the Witch King, but luckily, I am no man. Here's the trailer for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, for Frodo.
The eye of the enemy is moving.
The end has come.
Every day, Frodo moves closer to Mordor. How do we know Frodo is alive? What does your heart tell you?
Come, Master. Come to Smeagol. This is your test. Every path you have trod through wilderness, through war, has led to this road.
The enemy will never let Aragorn come to the throne of Gondor.
It is time. Give him the sword of the king.
Become who you were born to be. The precious will be ours. He means to murder us! Never!
I'm not sending him away. Come, Smeagol.
Order set. The pieces are moving.
He is here.
We come to it at last.
I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of man fails. When we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
Whatever happens, stay with me.
This day, we fight!
All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you.
We shall see the Shire again.
You gave away your life's grace. I cannot protect you anymore.
We cannot achieve victory through strength of arms.
Not for ourselves.
But we can give Frodo a chance.
Sauron's forces had laid siege to Minas Tirith, the capital of Gondor, in their efforts to eliminate the race of men. The once great kingdom, watched over by a fading steward, has never been in more desperate need of its king. But can Aragorn answer the call of his heritage and become what he was born to be? In no small measure, the fate of Middle-earth rests on his broad shoulders. With the final battle joined and the legions of darkness gathering, Gandalf urgently tries to rally Gondor's broken army to action. He is aided by Rohan's king Theoden, who unites his warriors Yet, even with their courage and passionate loyalty, the forces of men, with Éowyn and Merry hidden amongst them, are no match for the enemies swarming against Gondor. Still, in the face of great losses, they charge forward into the battle of their lifetimes, tied together by their singular goal to keep Sauron distracted and give the ring-bearer a chance to complete his quest. Their hopes rest with Frodo, journeying across treacherous enemy lands to cast the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom. The closer Frodo gets to his destination, the heavier his burden becomes, and the more he must rely on Samwise Gamgee. Gollum and the Ring will test Frodo's allegiances and ultimately his humanity. Let's run through the cast. Pretty much every single cast member returning from the last movie on this one, with a couple more as well. We have Elijah Wood as Frodo Baggins, Ian McKellen as Gandalf, Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn, Sean Astin as Samwise Gamgee, Andy Serkis as Gollum, Billy Boyd as Peregrine Took, Dominic Monaghan as Meriadoc Brandybuck, John Rhys-Davies as Gimli, Orlando Bloom as Legolas, Bernard Hill as Theoden, Miranda Otto as Éowyn, David Wenham as Faramir, Carl Urban as Éomer, Liv Tyler as Arwen, Kate Blanchett as Galadriel, Christopher Lee as Saruman, Hugo Weaving as Elrond, John Noble as Denethor, and Ian Holm as Bilbo Baggins. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King has a screenplay by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens and Peter Jackson, was directed by Peter Jackson, and was based on The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. So, this is kind of a big deal. After 2 years of attention and acclaim since the release of The Fellowship of the Ring, audience and critical anticipation for The Return of the King was extremely high. Only maybe Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace had been more highly anticipated. The culmination of a remarkable trilogy, the scale of which no one had ever seen before, was coming to fruition. And after 2 outstanding entries in the trilogy, amassing over $1.5 billion at the box office, 19 Academy Award nominations and 6 wins, there was no way this was going to disappoint. Just like this episode, maybe. And in this episode, we're going to delve into the stuff that I've not yet managed to talk about. Basically, there's things that are, things that were, and some things that have not yet come to pass. Unsurprisingly, the film version of The Return of the King has several significant differences to Tolkien's original book for pacing, dramatic effect, and cinematic storytelling. Character changes included Aragorn more reluctant about claiming the throne than his book counterpart, Denethor more overtly antagonistic and unstable from his first appearance, Éowyn and Faramir's romance given little screen time as opposed to it being developing in the Houses of Healing after the battle. This is of course after Éowyn's crush on Aragorn finding out he's in love with Arwen and that love triangle being resolved. In the book version of The Two Towers, Saruman is confronted at Isengard after Helm's Deep and dies in the Scouring of the Shire, which is never shown in Jackson's films. In the extended edition, Saruman dies at Isengard when stabbed by Wormtongue. Apparently, Christopher Lee's real experiences of military service meant he brought a sense of realism to Saruman's death, rather than your typical dead. The army of the dead could only help defeat the Corsairs at Pelagia, then are released in the book. In the film, they are brought to Minas Tirith to defeat Sauron's army directly. In the book, Aragorn uses the Palantir to challenge Sauron, but in the film, this doesn't happen. Frodo and Sam's journey has added tension in the movie, including being tricked by Gollum, leading to Sam leaving for a brief period, only to return to save Frodo from Shelob. Gollum also actively fights with Frodo in Mount Doom, which also doesn't happen in the books. The writers felt that simply having Gollum slip and fall was anticlimactic. Originally, it was planned that Frodo would heroically push Gollum over the edge to destroy him in the ring, but the production team realised that this would make it look as if Frodo was murdering Gollum, so instead they had Frodo and Gollum struggle for possession of the ring. New scenes were added to the film that weren't present in the book, including Denethor attempting to burn Faramir alive while still conscious, Legolas single-handedly taking down an Oliphaunt, Arwen's fate being tied to the ring, and the extended battle sequences at Minas Tirith and the Pelennor Fields. Now, of course, the book includes extensive appendices covering the Fourth Age and characters' fates. There was no way the film could do this. It was already rather lengthy, so instead it uses a condensed epilogue showing only the Hobbit's return and Frodo's departure. As I mentioned in the episode on the Fellowship of the Ring, Christopher Tolkien specifically wasn't happy with these adaptations, claiming they trivialised his father's work, which was more philosophical and politically nuanced, with greater emphasis on the declining age and passing of magic. The films are more action-orientated, with greater focus on battles and physical confrontation, and a clear distinction between good and evil. In many ways, adapting The Lord of the Rings was always going to be a thankless task. You were never going to please everyone. While Jackson's changes altered some of Tolkien's themes and narrative structure, his adaptation is still considered one of the more faithful epic fantasy adaptations in cinema, capturing the essence of the story while adapting it to a different medium. The Tolkien estate doesn't agree, but you adapt an adaptation. And this is a beautifully lavish adaptation with such care and attention to detail in every regard. It's really hard not to love these movies, even if you weren't a film history podcast, as well as realising they age like a fine wine because of the care and attention and the reliance on practical makeup effects and prosthetics. And this is a great way to segue into the wonderful award-winning hair and makeup. The team, led by makeup artist Peter King and hair designer Peter Owen, alongside special makeup effects artist Richard Taylor and prosthetics supervisor Gino Azevedo, faced immense challenges in creating distinctive looks for various races and characters. Pretty much every character in these movies wears a wig, which were mostly made from human hair. Over 10,000 wigs and hairpieces were used across the trilogy and were often elaborately braided, or in the case of the elves, straight out of a L'Oreal hair ad. Long beards were also fake. Christopher Lee's wig and beard combo took hours to apply each day. Ian McKellen not only had a long grey wig and beard, but also facial prosthetics on his nose and ears and age makeup. Also in age makeup, King Theoden before he's broken free of Saruman's curse. The hobbits had large prosthetic feet and ears. The feet were made from lightweight foam latex over a thin rubber base that couldn't be reused after wearing. Each pair were custom fitted to each actor's foot measurements, took up to 90 minutes to apply, and extended approximately 5 inches beyond the actor's real toes. Each foot was also covered with meticulously applied synthetic hair and painted with multiple layers of silicone-based makeup for realistic skin tones. Each Hobbit actor had to change their walking style to accommodate the shift in their centre of gravity, and while the soles were thin enough to allow ground feel, they were hard to walk on in tough terrain, and sharp rocks could easily break the delicate foam latex. They also couldn't get them wet, as this would mat the hair and could dissolve the adhesives. They worked with special movement coaches to develop a natural-looking gait and build tolerance with special exercises to strengthen their ankles and calves. Special boots that mimicked hobbit feet were used for challenging terrain. The elves had pointed ear prosthetics and distinctive eyebrows, with long flowing wigs with intricate braids and ornamentation, and illuminating makeup techniques to make them feel otherworldly. Dwarves had prosthetic noses, foreheads and facial hair. The orcs and Uruk-hai had full face prosthetics with custom teeth and coloured contact lenses, plus full body makeup that took 3 to 5 hours to apply. Up to 15 makeup artists worked simultaneously during large battle scenes, and those teams developed water and sweat-proof makeup techniques for the action sequences. Throughout these episodes, I've talked a little about the detailed set design, the use of dual-scale sets and scale doubles, but what I haven't yet is the vision effects achieved through set design. Basic force perspective involves precisely positioning actors at different distances from the camera. Characters meant to appear smaller, hobbits and dwarves, were placed further away from the camera, and characters meant to appear larger, humans, elves and wizards, were positioned closer to the camera, and camera angles and custom-built sets were designed to hide these distance differences. Force perspective has been used in films since the early 1900s, with Georges Méliès' Le Voyage dans la Lune using basic force perspective to create the illusion of the spacecraft landing in the moon's eye. Fritz Lang's 1927 masterpiece Metropolis is another early and influential example, using forced perspective to create the illusion of massive cityscapes and architecture. The film featured elaborate miniature sets combined with forced perspective to create the futuristic city style. Alfred Hitchcock was also an early master of the technique, using it notably in his 1958 film Vertigo to create the illusion of height and depth in the bell tower sequences without requiring the actors to be in actual danger. Traditional forced perspective works best with static shots. Forced perspective is a lot more difficult in moving shots. For dynamic scenes, the team created a moving platform system where actors and camera could move in precise synchronization. Computerized motion control rigs that maintained proper perspective during movement were used. Two simultaneous camera rigs moved in precise mathematical relationship to each other. As the primary camera moved, the secondary camera would move at a precisely calculated different speed and trajectory. This maintained the proper perspective relationship between foreground and background elements. This system could account for dolly moves, pans, tilts, and even complex combinations. It was quite taxing for the actors, though, who couldn't interact with each other, and complex shots, like Gandalf and Frodo together on Gandalf's cart, would often take dozens of takes to get right. For those shots, two separate carts were built at different scales, with each mounted on a motion control rig. As the camera tracked alongside, both carts moved at precisely calculated different speeds. The background landscape was carefully designed to hide the seam between scales. Particularly in Bag End, custom-built split sets with sections at different scales were positioned side by side, with characters performing on their respective set, with a precisely aligned dividing line between the sets hidden by careful set design. The two sections were then filmed simultaneously and then seamlessly composited. The Return of the King would not just feature the return of the actual king, but several more standout scenes and creatures. Shelob, the giant spider, was created through a combination of practical effects, puppetry, and CGI. Her inspiration came from several real-world spider species: New Zealand's tunnel web spider for body structure, black widows for the distinctive abdomen shape, huntsman spiders for leg movement patterns, and various tarantula species for the overall hair texture. They wanted Shelob to be biologically plausible and not just something fantastical, and let's be honest, she is absolutely terrifying. Her practical parts included a full-size physical model of Shelob's head and fangs for close-up shots, mechanical legs that could be manipulated by puppeteers, detailed practical models of Shelob's eyes, and partial body segments for specific shots where Frodo interacts with the spider. Her webbing was made from a specialised elastic silicone material and was woven, filling tunnels and passages, making escape difficult for her prey. The VFX team created specific light interaction for when webbing wrapped around characters. The digital Shelob contained over 300,000 individual hair strands. Custom animation systems were developed for her eight-legged movement and surface texturing, including translucent areas that showed internal organs in certain lighting, including when she is stabbed with sting. The spider's body realistically glows with the sword's blue light. And something I forgot to mention last episode, and it was kind of important: horses. There were many of them in battle scenes, including Helm's Deep, but also just for general riding by both the heroes and the villains. The production employed approximately 70 to 80 horses throughout filming, which were trained specifically for the films over several months. Many of these horses were Andalusians, chosen for their powerful build and flowing manes. Different horses were trained for specific actions: riding, standing, falling, etc., and professional horse wranglers and riders were employed throughout production. The American Humane Association did have concerns over some of the horses' treatment, including Demero, the light grey horse that played Gandalf's horse Shadowfax, who was purchased with a known diagnosis of melanoma. His condition meant he was retired as soon as his scenes for the Fellowship of the Ring were completed, under veterinary advice, to receive ongoing care. Demero is not featured in any sequel and was replaced by Blanco, and Demero was alive and well on the publication of the American Humane Association's investigation. Some horses were euthanized, though, due to injuries sustained on set, and 4 horses died of illnesses. But then on the other hand, some horses formed such a close bond with their actor that they were then adopted by them, which is what happened with Viggo Mortensen and his on-screen horse Brago, played by horse actors Urias and Kenny, both of whom Mortensen bought after filming ended. Carl Urban's spear flip while riding was him performing the stunt, and it took him ages to perfect it, and he did that while the horse was moving too. He and Miranda Otto performed many of their own riding stunts. Bernard Hill, who played King Theoden, also learned to ride horses for the role. And of course, the Rohirrim relied on their horses. The real-life horse cavalry was 60 strong, many ridden by professional riders. Digital horses were added to increase the size of the group. Weta Digital created hundreds of CGI horses for the stunts that real horses couldn't do, including falls and visible injuries, and the scenes of horses being attacked by fell beasts. I mentioned last episode the massive software used for crowds during battle. It was also used for horses, with horse behaviour AI for horse crowd stimulation. The Nazgûl start riding horses and then upgrade to fell beasts, which were inspired by prehistoric pterosaurs, bats, vultures, reptiles, and decomposing corpses for their skin textures. The production wanted to avoid comparisons to traditional dragons, but also make them plausibly capable of flight. Weta Workshop created dozens of concept sketches and paintings and detailed maquettes, full-scale head and neck models for reference, and carried out anatomical studies to ensure believable movement. All 9 fell beasts would be seen launching from Minas Morgul, then attack Osgiliath and in the Pelennor Fields. And the creature's design evolved significantly during pre-production. Early versions had more dragon-like features before settling on the more bat or pterosaur-inspired final look. The digital fell beasts had their own rigging systems for the wing mechanics and physics-based simulations for wing membrane movement. Practical heads were built for close-ups, and a mechanical buck rig was created for shots of the Witch King mounting the creature. Other creatures, such as trolls, the Watcher in the Water, the Balrog, the rest of the Ents, the Wargs, and the Mumakil, were completely CG. Each one went through months of creation and variation as sketches before approved designs were sculpted into 5-foot maquettes and scanned into a computer. Animators then rigged skeletons and muscles before animation, and final detailed colouring scanned from painted maquettes. Along with the creatures, Weta created realistic digital doubles for many miniature longshots. You think Legolas really slid down the trunk of an Oliphaunt? Tolkien named them Oliphants. Gondor calls them Mumak. Mumakil is the plural. The more you know. Anyway, these CG human doubles were scanned from having actors perform movements in a motion capture suit, with additional details created using ZBrush. Speaking of Gondor, I hear the beacons are lit and Gondor calls for aid. And remarkably, many of the beacons were practical sets. The production team scouted a series of spectacular mounting locations across New Zealand's South Island that could represent the Beacon Hills, including Mount Gunn, Remarkable's mountain range near Queenstown, Ben O'Howe Range near Lake Pukaki, and various peaks in Fiordland National Park. Real beacon fires were constructed and lit on accessible mountain locations. Some mounting top beacons were physically built as practical sets. Helicopter crews filmed actual New Zealand mountain ranges for background plates. The first beacon at Amondin was a full-scale practical set built on location, but then digital fires were also used, mostly for distant beacons or locations that couldn't be practically filmed. Mountain ranges were also extended and enhanced digitally or with matte paintings, with CGI used to create the appearance of vast distances between peaks. Weather effects and atmospheric conditions were digitally controlled for consistency. The sequence, which lasts just over 2 minutes in the final film, took several months to complete from conception to final composite. It's considered a signature example of how Peter Jackson's visual storytelling, taking what was a brief mention in Tolkien's book and transforming it into a visually spectacular moment that communicates the vast scale of Middle-earth and demonstrating how practical filmmaking techniques can be seamlessly combined with digital technology to create scenes of breathtaking scope and emotional resonance. Oh, and also the Army of the Dead, primarily CGI creations with their spectral blue-green glow. They needed to be clearly human, clearly dead, clearly incorporeal. Base character models were created with detailed anatomy and period-appropriate armour. Specialised shader programs gave them their translucent, ethereal quality, and each ghost had subtle variations in appearance and armour design. The King of the Dead was given additional detail and screen presence. The Paths of the Dead was a practical cave set with digital extensions, and the Skull Avalanche combined practical and digital elements. 1,000 skulls were created just for this scene. And honestly, we have so much to get through. I feel like I should have talked about some of these in a previous episode, but I want to focus a bit on the Eye of Sauron because it differs quite a bit from Tolkien's original descriptions. In his writings, the eye is primarily metaphorical or spiritual, rather than physical. It's described as the eye or the great eye, rather than a literal physical organ, and represented Sauron's awareness, will, and attention, rather than his physical form. It was a manifestation of his power, something that characters sense rather than see. It was never explicitly described as an actual flaming eye atop Barad-dûr. Peter Jackson, possibly wisely for a film adaptation, chose to create a massive physical eye of fire suspended between two spikes. The eye is constantly visible, with flames perpetually emanating from it. When the eye is searching for something or someone, it projects a visible searchlight beam, and it can rotate physically to direct its gaze. A distinct primary physical manifestation of Sauron's power. Sauron's physical form is only seen in the prologue. The eye is Sauron in the movies, and it's a permanent fixture of Barad-dûr's summit. To make the eye, they filmed flames practically using specialist lighting and photographed real eyes for reference before combining them with a digital structure created using fluid dynamic simulations. Custom particle systems generated the swirling flames, and the cat-like slit pupil was rendered separately with its own animation system. Subtle pupil dilation and contraction conveyed attention and focus, which became most intense and aggressive as the ring came closer to Mordor. The eye also needed to appear as though it was physically mounted atop the Dark Tower. Digital models of Barad-dûr were designed with a special platform for the eye. Architectural elements were created that framed the eye like a socket, and specialised lighting simulated how the eye's glow would illuminate the surrounding tower. The resulting visual became one of the trilogy's most memorable images, a perfect visual shorthand for Sauron's malevolent presence and watchfulness, and a physical embodiment of what happens once the ring is finally destroyed in Mount Doom. You will notice I'm trying to segue into everything I need to talk about. So, let's talk about Mount Doom. The real-world mountain used as the main visual for Mount Doom was Mount Naruhoi in New Zealand's Tongariro National Park. It's an almost perfect symmetrical volcanic cone that stands at 2,291 metres or 7,516 feet. It is an active stratovolcano, and that distinctive conical shape made it an ideal foundation for Mount Doom. But there are restrictions on filming on Mount Naruhoi. While Mount Naruhoi was used as a reference and appears in some distant shots, the production team wasn't actually permitted to film directly on the mountain itself. The mountain is sacred to the local Maori people, and filming permission was not granted for the actual slopes. So instead of filming on the actual mountain, the production used wide landscape shots of Tongariro National Park with Mount Naruhoi visible. They filmed on nearby volcanic terrain to capture the barren landscape of Mordor, terrain I had actually visited. They constructed sets for the base of the mountain and the path leading up to it, and used those bigatures I mentioned last episode for certain angles and close-ups. Many close-up exterior shots of our heroes on the slopes of Mount Doom were actually filmed on sets built at Stone Street Studios in Wellington, which featured practical rock formations and ash-covered ground, and was surrounded by blue-green screens for background replacement. They also digitally enhanced Mount Doom to make it more menacing, with digital lava flows, ash and smoke. The broader region of Mordor was filmed in the Rangipo Desert, where the Black Gate of Mordor scenes were filmed, and the Tokino ski field where Frodo, Sam and Gollum look out over the gates of Mordor, and the Wakapapa ski field where Isildur cuts off Sauron's finger in the opening scenes of the Fellowship of the Ring, and where Mordor's armies leave Minas Morgul on the Orc Road. And considering this movie is basically Aragorn's in name, it's no surprise that the leader of men also became the de facto leader of the cast, mostly due to his incredible work ethic. His rugged good looks, his complete encompassing of the Aragorn character, and literally being the most handsome man in all eternity. I mean, come on. Seriously, men like Viggo Mortensen actually exist in the world, and they adopt horses and break bones for their art, and are just apparently the loveliest men. Bernard Hill and Orlando Bloom shared a makeup trailer with Mortensen, and they formed a club with a name I cannot say because this is a family-friendly podcast. But it was basically the Seabago Club, which was a gossip and pass-it-on club, also featuring Sean Bean and Liv Tyler, and they covered everything from fashion, current affairs, and Hollywood. And what's so wonderful about these movies, and this trilogy in particular, is that the cast maintain a close relationship to this day, regularly appearing at conventions and just being shining beacons of perfect casting. Going from heroes to villains, Peter Jackson's extremely unpleasant experience in dealing with Harvey and Bob Weinstein when the film was being developed at Miramax would lead to their shared executive producer's credit at the end of this film, appearing over a pencil sketch of a man fighting off two oversized trolls. This is no accident. The trolls were designed to look like both Weinsteins. After he was indicted for sexual misconduct in 2018, Jackson retrospectively called Harvey Weinstein a real bully who ruined through mafia thuggery. And to be honest, this is nothing new. I've mentioned on this podcast several times about the stuff that Harvey Weinstein did that was common knowledge in Hollywood at that time. But thankfully, he is getting all of the comeuppance that is coming his way. And I have to finish this section with the main character of this movie. No, not Frodo, not Sam, Aragorn, Gandalf, or indeed Sauron, but the ring itself. The One Ring was created and designed by Jens Hansen's Goldsmiths, aka the makers of the world's most famous ring. They're located in Nelson, in New Zealand. They created the One Ring used in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films. Jens Hansen and his son, goldsmith Thorkild Hansen, submitted 15 prototypes before the design of the One Ring was chosen. They made more than 40 variations of the One Ring for the movies after being contacted by the production, and these rings were scaled for different scenes and sized to suit its various owners, from smaller solid gold versions that perfectly fit Hobbit's fingers to the 8-inch ring seen in the Lord of the Rings prologue, spinning and turning through the air. Should you want your own One Ring, which is a little bit oxymoronic, they sell Jens Hansen official replica One Rings on their website for just over $2,000, along with other elvish jewellery, including signet rings designed by Daniel Reeve, the calligrapher for the movie series. Did I say Reeve? That sounds a bit like Reeves. And this is the perfect way to segue into the obligatory Keanu reference for this episode. And if you don't know what that is, it's where I link the movie that I'm featuring with Keanu Reeves for no reason other than he is the best of men and elves and dwarf and hobbits and everything, basically. Now, obviously, this movie is about Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the King of Men. He has a luscious hair and beard combo. And who does that remind you of? Why, Keanu Reeves, of course, who is actually the King of Men. And it's just a huge coincidence that these two men are both perfect in every possible way, and they both have the luscious hair and the luscious beards. And I'm sure there probably was a way that I could officially link Keanu Reeves to this movie, and I have done for the other two by linking The Matrix with these movies. However, I couldn't pass up linking the hair and beard. Now, for the past 2 episodes, I've mentioned that this episode I wanted to talk specifically about Howard Shore's music. And so I haven't talked about the music much at all, apart from Enya's Let It Be in The Fellowship of the Ring. And Howard Shore's score is really one of the most epic scores ever created for film. Shore was so much more than a composer for hire. He collaborated with Peter Jackson for almost 4 years, and he wanted the score to be as much of the narrative force as the script, that you could play the tracks back to back and trace the arc of the story. And just like in the movie, and Frodo's trip to Mordor, I make it sound like he's booked a package holiday. Frodo's quest to Mordor, I should say, Shore was on his own epic operatic film score quest. American composer James Horner and Polish composer Wojciech Kilar had been considered to be the composers for the movie. Howard Shore visited the set in 1999 and composed a version of the Shire theme and Frodo's theme before Jackson began shooting. Shore watched the assembly cuts of The Fellowship of the Ring and The Return of the King in 2000, and he included over 50 leitmotifs to represent the different characters, cultures, and places. There are, for instance, multiple leitmotifs just for the Hobbits and the Shire. Jackson and Shaw would meet each year for Jackson to advise on the score, which took 6 weeks minimum. The great majority of the lyrics used in the libretto are in the invented languages of Middle-earth, representing the various cultures and races in Tolkien's writings. These languages include Quenya and Sindarin for the elves, Andunaic and Rohirric for men, and Kuzdul for the dwarves. And yes, I probably have butchered all of those words, and I am sorry. While parts of the score for the first film were recorded in Wellington, New Zealand, virtually all of the trilogy score was recorded in Watford Town Hall in London and mixed at Abbey Road Studios. For the soundtrack, the score was primarily played by the London Philharmonic Orchestra, ranging from 93 to 120 players throughout the recording. The third film's end song, Into the West, was written by Annie Lennox, Fran Walsh and Howard Shore, and performed by Annie Lennox, and that would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song, the Golden Globe Award for Best Original Song, and the Grammy Award for Best Song Written for Visual Media. It was inspired by and dedicated to 17-year-old Maori filmmaker Cameron Duncan, who Jackson and Walsh befriended. Duncan died of cancer in 2003. There's also diegetic music too, not composed by Howard Shore but orchestrated by him, such as Bilbo's Farewell Party, which includes music by Plan 9, a group who'd previously worked with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. A few of the diegetic songs are settings of poems by Tolkien, interspersed in the text of The Lord of the Rings, including The Road Goes Ever On, sung softly by Ian McKellen when Gandalf arrives in Hobbiton in his farm cart. The Funeral of Theodred, in the extended version of The Two Towers, was composed by Plan 9 and performed by Miranda Otto, playing Éowyn, but the words themselves are not Tolkien's. The series' music became the most successful of Shore's career, earning 3 Oscars, 2 Golden Globes and 3 Grammys, among other nominations. Some of his themes or leitmotifs, like the Shire theme, became individually popular. He invited the musicologist Doug Adams to observe the composition and document it in what became the 2010 book The Music of the Lord of the Rings films. And I think we can agree that the score for The Lord of the Rings is probably one of the greatest scores ever made for any movie series ever. Each composition is unique, memorable, and just perfectly encapsulates the scene it is in. I think you can go on YouTube and just listen to 12 hours worth of Howard Shore score, should you want to. And while there are some standout themes, like concerning hobbits, pretty much every single one, it will just take you to that scene in the movie. And I absolutely adore this score. It is genuinely one of my favourites of all time. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King premiered at the Embassy Theatre in Wellington, New Zealand on the 1st of December 2003. It was estimated that more than a quarter of the city's population lined the streets of Wellington for the premiere. It was released to extremely high anticipation on the 17th of December 2003, where of course it hit number 1 at the US box office, even with its traditional Wednesday release. The Lord of the Rings loves a Wednesday release. Now, Something's Gotta Give also came out the same week, and I could have used that as the obligatory Keanu reference because Keanu is so perfect in that movie, and you'd never choose Jack Nicholson over him, but I digress, and never mind. The Return of the King stayed at number 1 for 5 weeks and was eventually dethroned, get it, King, dethroned, in its 6th week by Along Came Polly. It would stay in the top 10 for 10 weeks and return to the top 10 in its 13th week, dropping out again in its 15th week. On a production budget of $94 million, The Return of the King grossed $377 million domestically in the US and $741.9 million internationally, for a total worldwide gross of $1.1 billion, making it the highest grossing film of 2003, the second highest grossing film of the 2000s behind James Cameron's Avatar. It set a Wednesday opening record with $34 million. It was the highest December opening day, Eventually surpassed by its stablemate, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, it set opening day records in many countries, including here in the UK, Germany, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, Greece, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Mexico, Chile, and Puerto Rico. In the trilogy's beloved New Zealand, where literally every part of this magical perfect trilogy came together, the film set opening day, opening weekend, single day, Friday gross, Saturday gross, and Sunday gross records with $1.7 million in 4 days. The Lord of the Rings trilogy would go on to become the highest grossing motion picture trilogy worldwide of all time, with over $2.9 billion, beating other series such as the original Star Wars trilogy, and became New Line Cinema's highest grossing release. New Line Cinema took a punt on Peter Jackson's ambitious idea, and it paid off in dividends. It's estimated that the gross income from non-box office sales and merchandise has been at least equal to the box office for all 3 films. Now, while concrete figures are hard to come by, in that case, the total gross income for the trilogy could be in the region of $6 billion, following New Line Cinema's initial investment of $300 million. And that doesn't even include the returns from tourism, which I'll get into next episode. Now, not only is this a huge financial success for a trilogy and for a series of movies, and for this movie in particular, it was also a huge critical smash as well. It holds a rating of 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a critical consensus reading, visually breathtaking and emotionally powerful. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King is a moving and satisfying conclusion to a great trilogy. The Return of the King received 11 Academy Award nominations for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, Best Original Song, Best Visual Effects, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup, Best Sound Mixing, and Best Film Editing. At the 76th Academy Awards in 2004, the film won all of the categories for which it was nominated, and it shares the record for the highest Academy Award wins total, along with Titanic, which also stars Bernard Hill, and Ben-Hur, and holds the record for the highest clean sweep at the Oscars, surpassing the 9 awards earned by both Gigi and The Last Emperor. The Return of the King also won 4 Golden Globes, including Best Picture for Drama, Best Director, Best Original Score, and Best Original Song, 5 BAFTAs for Best Film, Best Screenplay Adapted, Best Cinematography, Best Visual Effects, and the Orange Film of the Year Award, 2 Grammy Awards, 9 Saturn Awards, the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Picture. The entire cast won the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Cast Motion Picture. Out of 337 award nominations, The Return of the King won 258 awards. In total, the series received 475 awards out of 800 nominations, making the films the most awarded film series in cinematic history. And fantasy is not historically a genre that does well at big awards ceremonies, especially the prestigious Oscars. And yet, as a trilogy, it received 30 Oscar nominations with 17 wins. There are a couple of reasons cited on the internet for this. The first is just the outstanding technical excellence on screen, the revolutionary visual effects, the groundbreaking motion capture technology for Gollum, meticulous attention to detail in the production and set design, costumes, hair and makeup, Howard Shore's epic and comprehensive score. It was a level of achievement that the Oscars simply couldn't not recognise. It also carried significant cultural weight, being based on highly respected literature with academic credibility. J.R.R. Tolkien's work was already considered a classic and not just mere fantasy. It was long thought of as unfilmable, but Jackson's trilogy treated the source material with reverence and seriousness, avoiding the campy elements that had stigmatised fantasy, but also injecting moments of humour, levity, compassion and romance. That ultimately it wasn't just good versus evil, but also how evil corrupts over time, friendship and sacrifice. Filming 3 massive movies simultaneously was not only impressive, but monumental, and the fact that the quality remained consistent probably meant there was accumulated goodwill for the trilogy that The Return of the King then received for the entire trilogy, despite the previous two movies also receiving technical recognition. While it wouldn't lead to a breakthrough of fantasy movies receiving nods at the Oscars, it did open up to future wins by movies like The Shape of Water, Black Panther, Mad Max Fury Road, and Avatar, which were all genre films that aren't the usual Oscar fare. While no out-and-out fantasy film has repeated the Lord of the Rings' comprehensive Oscar dominance, it suggests that the trilogy transcended its genre rather than permanently changing Academy attitudes towards fantasy. The combination of literary prestige, technical excellence, emotional resonance, and the unprecedented three-film achievement created a unique situation that's unlikely to ever be replicated. And like all of these movies, there is an extended version with 50 minutes of new material, added special effects and music, 4 commentaries and 6 hours of supplementary material, plus 10 minutes of fan club credits. The theatrical version is 201 minutes, the extended version 251 minutes. The series as a whole runs for 9 hours, 18 minutes in the theatrical version, and 11 hours, 26 minutes in the extended version. But although long for a film trilogy, this was nothing compared to Tolkien's work, which has a circa 60-hour running time for the complete audiobook series. And there was no one who could world build like Tolkien. He believed in a person tapping into their own beliefs and understandings of the real world to create a rich, diverse fictional world. His primary focus was always telling a good story, but that story also comes with rich characters, languages, genealogy, and history. It wasn't necessarily something entirely new, but based on the world we live in, his own faith, and those fantasy tropes of good versus evil, the struggle between the light and the dark, and that even good can become corrupted by evil. Realism, not fantasy, is the groundwork of this trilogy. Despite the fantasy setting and built-in mythology, Peter Jackson and his team didn't set out to make a fantasy movie. They set out to make something completely real, completely believable, and completely perfect. These movies are exactly what Verbal Diorama is here for, and 24, 23, and 22 years later, they hold up exceptionally well because of the practical work, the bigatures, the makeup, and the groundbreaking CGI. These are movies that will stand the test of time, that people will be talking about in 80 years' time, like we currently talk about The Wizard of Oz. Timeless, perfection, maybe a little bit less asbestos on the sets, and maybe a little bit less carcinogenic makeup, though. Peter Jackson proved unfilmable material was not only filmable, but that he could create a cinematic trilogy masterpiece with an inimitable legacy that even he himself couldn't match again. But I'm going to come back to the Hobbit series very briefly next episode. And I am going to leave it there because we do have one more episode to finish this huge 5-episode series of episodes. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to go with it. So, thank you for listening. As always, I would love to hear your thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And as always, thank you for your continued support of this podcast. If you want to get involved and help this podcast grow, you can find me, follow me on social media. I am at Verbal Diorama, where you can share posts, like posts, comment on posts. It all helps with visibility and hopefully sharing the love for this podcast. You can leave a rating or review wherever you found this podcast, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser. I believe most apps now have an ability to star rate podcasts. So if you have that ability in your podcast app, please, 5 stars would be lovely. Thank you very much. But please show your support for leaving a rating or review. Or simply just tell your friends and family about this podcast, about this episode, and about where they can get this podcast and this episode from. So the next episode is the final episode of this 5-part series, and it's going to be primarily on The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, but also on the everlasting legacy of The Lord of the Rings, and basically what came next and what happens next for the series. If you do enjoy what I do for this podcast, or you simply just want to support an indie podcaster who does literally everything on her own, and you have some spare funds, you can financially contribute to the upkeep of this podcast. Now, you are under no obligation. This podcast is free, and it always will be free. But if you do enjoy what I do and you get value out of what I do, there are a couple of ways that you can help if you wish. You can make a one-off donation at verbaldiorama.com/tips, or you can go to verbaldiorama.com/Patreon and you can join the Patreon for this podcast. All money made goes back into this podcast for paying for things like software subscriptions, website hosting, or new equipment. Huge thank you to the incredible patrons of this podcast, many of whom have been with me for years and years. I am so appreciative of their support. They are Claudia, Simon, Laurel, Derek, Kat, Andy, Mike, Luke, Michael, Scott, Brendan, Lisa, Sam, Jack, Dave, Stuart, Nicholas So, Kev, Pete, Heather, Danny, Ali, Stu, Brett, Philip M, Zenos, Sean, Rhino, Philip K, Adam, Elaine, Kyle, and Aaron. If you want to get in touch, you can email verbaldiorama@gmail.com. You can say hi, you can give feedback or suggestions. I do try and reply to every single email I receive, and I do love to receive your emails. So if you do enjoy this podcast, or you're just a big fan of The Lord of the Rings and you just want to point out something that I didn't say, or you just want to get in touch and wax lyrical about Lord of the Rings, then you can email me directly, or you can go to verbaldiorama.com and fill out the little contact form. And hopefully you will join me next week for the final part of this 300th episode Lord of the Rings extravaganza. I can't believe this is the 300th episode. I can't believe I've done this 300 times now, but I'm genuinely so grateful for you listening to this podcast and for supporting this podcast. So thank you very much, and hopefully you will join me next week. And finally,
Do you remember the Shire, Mr. Frodo? It'll be spring soon. The orchards will be in blossom, and the birds will be nesting in the hazel thicket. And they'll be sowing the summer barley in the lower fields, and eating the first of the strawberries with cream. Do you remember the taste of strawberries?
No, Sam. I can't recall the taste of food. No, the sound of water. The touch of grass. Naked in the dark. There's nothing. No veil between me and the wheel of fire. I can see him with my waking eyes.
Then let us be rid of it, once and for all. Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Come on!
bye.
Movies you know, movies you don't.